If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. I did an episode on perfectionism recently. In that episode, I argued that it's wasteful and should be eliminated. That is perfectionism. But in some cases, it seems to be our only way to control an attempt at quality. That is, our only quality target is perfection. So if we eliminate it as a goal, then are we just left with accepting sloppy work from our knowledge workers? Or is there some other approach that might help us out while we get rid of perfectionism, but still maintain some quality standard? What should that quality standard be? So in this episode, I'll talk about challenges of quality and knowledge work. And there are some challenges to understanding quality and knowledge work. Through the episode, we should arrive at some actionable ideas of how to manage quality and knowledge work. And the question is, can we have quality targets? And I'll argue that we can. So we definitely want to avoid perfectionism. We want to support time boxing. We want to support the idea that we can say, this should take me 4 hours and then schedule 4 hours and then get the work done in 4 hours. And this is as compared to, I've argued before, one of the ways we learn how to do work is to catch snatches of time all the way up to the last possible minute before the deadline and then produce it in. And this is where perfectionism causes the challenge, is we work on it and we work on it. And then we say, oh, I've got time to look at it one more time. And we change some things and we work on it and we work on it right up to the deadline. And then we magically declare it done. I would like for us as knowledge workers to be able to get stuff done on more of a scheduled basis. Thus, we can actually better manage our productivity. So we need to be able to manage quality. We need to be able to set quality targets and have some level of confidence that we will meet those quality targets. We need to do that because we need to manage cost. We can't continue to strive for perfectionism without getting paid for striving for perfectionism. So our productivity demands that we manage quality, but how can we go about doing it? So first, we'll need to define quality in the knowledge work sphere. I assume that anybody listening to this episode knows what I mean by the term knowledge work. I'll give a brief sentence on knowledge work, but there's plenty of references back in other episodes and also out on the dobusyright.com website that talk about what knowledge work is. But just quickly, knowledge work is work that we do with our brains. Information comes in, we operate on it with knowledge or other information that's in our skulls, and then we produce an output that's usually an information-based product. So that's what we mean when we say knowledge work. A corollary to that is that knowledge workers should be experts. A good knowledge worker should be the local expert in whatever their kind of work is and whatever their knowledge is. A doctor should be at least a local expert in medicine. A lawyer should be at least a local expert in the law. And so when we deal with knowledge workers, it's very difficult for a non-knowledge worker to manage a knowledge worker because the knowledge worker knows what needs to be done to a much greater degree than a casual user or even the client knows what needs to be done. So this is the challenge with knowledge work. As the expert in knowledge work, people can come to you for a product, but they can only really say, can you help with this? They can only really say, you're the expert, and I think I need an expert in this space, but beyond that, I don't really know what I need. And this as compared to perhaps a physical product where the consumer really understands and knows and can have preferences and understands what they need. So there is a sense in knowledge work where only the knowledge worker can really know what he or she is trying to say or trying to deliver. Only he or she can understand the level at which a solution needs to be sophisticated in their knowledge area. And so this leads to a quality challenge because our customers can't define quality for us. In addition, there's not a statistical measure of quality. And that's because typically knowledge work results, knowledge work deliverables are typically one-off. And the reason that they're typically one-off is because if we need a knowledge work product again, we'll just produce a copy, which is essentially free. So that's a challenge to this statistical notion of quality. Quality in physical products is almost always statistical in nature. And we say, errors per million parts or defects per million operations or whatever. And that's a statistical average kind of a measurement of quality. So we want to dig down a little bit on what quality is. So quality actually is an outcome. Quality is a property of an executed process. No process is designed to produce less than 100% quality, but every process does produce less than 100% quality. It may not be much less, but it is less because, as we know, perfection is unattainable. So to some degree, quality is like exams you took in school, at least some of the time. Quality is like this, in the sense that there's a paper with 100 questions on it, and if you answer all 100 questions correctly, then you get high marks or maximum marks or 100% in the American school system. But then any mistake then just subtracts from that. So there's this level of perfection. There's this level of high knowledge that the test can measure, and all it can do, it can't tell you if you have more knowledge than that. All it can tell you is if you have less knowledge than that. So a lot of times quality is like that. In other words, we have this objective standard and we say, okay, well, here's the standard and here's what you produced. Any difference between the standard and what you produced is a negative on your result. And it's almost impossible to exceed that standard. So in this sense, quality is this sort of negative a lot of times in this area in which we get points deducted. In knowledge work, and this may be unique to knowledge work, and I'll have more to say about this later, but quality also has this notion of production quality. In other words, when you produce a result, how pleasant is it to look at? In knowledge work, if you produce a result, a PowerPoint presentation, say, did you produce it with pleasing colors and shapes? Is it pretty? Do all the fonts match up? Is everything centered? And the notion of production quality is really interesting because a knowledge work result can be of high quality even if it's ugly, because it can be accurate, it can be correct, it can be truthful without being pretty. And so we have to think about production quality, and I bring it up here because I think sometimes we substitute production quality for result quality, but we'll get into that later on. So we think about, against an objective measurement of, say, perfect, we think about, okay, how can knowledge work have flaws that make it fall short of that perfection? But as with any comparison, you can't exceed the standard to be compared because any deviation is assumed to be wrong. So we'll talk about the kinds of flaws in knowledge work. And in order to do that, I'm going to go back to a previous episode, recap a previous episode where we defined categories of knowledge work. So here we're going to take those categories of knowledge work and we're going to use them to define deliverables for each category. Now, this is a non-exhaustive list, but just some examples of what each category of knowledge work might produce as a result. So the first level of knowledge work is this notion of factual knowledge. Deliverables in the factual knowledge space are just that. They're facts. When was the Declaration of Independence signed? You go to a factual knowledge worker and you say this, you ask this question, and they give you the date. And it's either correct or it's incorrect. To some degree, it might be interesting to see how close it was, and maybe that has value. But so it's very much about what are the facts, what do we know? And an example from the medical world for factual knowledge is measurement of symptoms in the service of diagnosis. Factual knowledge is what is your temperature right now? What is your blood pressure right now? And these are factual knowledge things. The second category of knowledge work that we think about is the notion of process knowledge. And process knowledge, the deliverables in process knowledge are what set of actions or what action should be taken next, usually next, but it could be out into the future as some sequence of steps. The example here of process knowledge, so the process would have a point to it. In other words, the process is intended to produce a result in the world, or even an intangible result. An example of process knowledge would be what is a treatment regimen and delivery mechanism for medications in a certain kind of treatment. So if you have a diagnosis, you have a set of symptoms that produces a diagnosis, then the process knowledge is, okay, now what do we do about it? Well, you take this drug in this dose every 12 hours. We're going to obey the regulations. I'm going to call it in, and then you're going to go get it. We're going to count on you to be able to do it properly, and you follow this treatment regimen. So that's process knowledge. The third kind is understanding knowledge. Understanding knowledge is about our strategy. It's about which tools apply to which situation. It's about deviations from standard procedure. This is understanding knowledge is probably the closest thing to experience as compared to just simple learning. So in our example, this understanding knowledge, a deliverable might be, let's talk about what happens when a treatment doesn't work, or when things are different from standard process. And the understanding kind of knowledge then says, oh, well, let's use this different tool. Let's use parts of this different treatment regimen to solve that part of the symptoms as well, right? So process knowledge is kind of understanding a process and following it in a regulatory obedient sense, versus understanding knowledge is about, okay, when and how do we deviate from that? Which process do we choose? Which document do we need to produce? The fourth kind of knowledge work is new knowledge creation. And the product here is literally that. It's new knowledge. It's science production. It's new kinds of engineering. It's new processes and new workflows. It's, hey, we didn't know that before, but now we do. And this is really, I think, knowledge creation helps us think about and understand the notion of insight. We create knowledge, we have insight into the situation, and we can say, oh, well, given the situation and given my experience, I would think we would need something that works about like this to help us in this area. Now let's go find that thing. So in line with our examples, perhaps knowledge creation would be new treatments, the identification of new causes of disease such that they could be treated with more efficacy. So that talks to us a little bit about knowledge creation and an example of the knowledge creation output. If you recall the categories of knowledge work episode, there was also a +1. There were 4 categories and a +1. The +1 is a +1 because I couldn't figure out whether it was its own category. It seemed to apply to all 4 of the categories, or maybe in some way underlie them or supersede them. So the +1 is problem solving knowledge work. Presented with a problem, then how does that problem get solved in a sense that it stops having cost or it stops interfering with something else that we want to do? Then it's solved. And the deliverable for problem solving kinds of knowledge work is practical applications of different kinds of knowledge, experiments to try. This should work kinds of ideas. So when we're engaged in problem solving kinds of knowledge, it's usually speculative and experimental. And it's, hey, let's try this. So in line with our examples thus far, perhaps if a doctor is presented with a patient who has confounding symptoms, if symptoms that don't really line up to any known condition with a known treatment regimen, then problem solving comes in and helps. Of course, when I say treatment, I mean treatment regimens, not regiments, regimens. And so I hope I've been pronouncing that clearly. So now that we've got deliverables for categories of knowledge work, we can think about, well, do they differ in measurements of quality? Perhaps the first thing we need to say is in knowledge work, there's usually not an objective external standard that we face. Just because copying of the kinds of work that knowledge workers do is so simple anymore, why would you have a copy if you can just have an original? Back in the day, the way to have a painting was one of the ways to have a painting was to get somebody to go and make a copy, a painted copy of a famous painting. Well, now, arguably, the best way to get a copy of a famous painting is to take a photo of that famous painting and render that so that you can see in detail. There may still be room for a painted copy of a painting. I'm not that much of an art aficionado that I understand, but we get the point that in knowledge work, if I'm to deliver a marketing plan, for example, as the result of my knowledge work, there's not an objective external standard for that marketing plan. There's an external standard for an average marketing plan, but that's a far cry from what may be needed in the situation. And this is a function of the fact that knowledge workers usually produce these one-off work products. So it's very difficult to say, oh, this is the perfect example, because they are very difficult to compare and they're so situationally oriented that it's a challenge to say how good it actually is in any sort of abstract overview kind of way. Another interesting feature of quality in knowledge work is it's often, I will say, I believe it's almost always that quality in knowledge work is defined by value in use. While these products of knowledge work are not actually usually tangible things, they do get used. And how they get used may be different. A book gets used by reading it, and the goal of reading it is perhaps comprehension of a new idea. A novel, of course, we read novels for entertainment purposes. But its value in use as compared to some objective standards-based value. It might be easiest to think about value in use if we think about a dog show. And so a dog show, there is an objective standard. It's this breed standard that specific dogs, specific breeds of dogs are supposed to exhibit the standards of the breed. A dog can be very, very close to its breed standard, but that does not necessarily enhance the dog's value in use. The dog's value in use is to be a working dog, a hunting dog, a companion dog, whatever that is, but how closely the dog conforms to the breed standard may have actually very little to do with the dog's value in use. And so while the dog is not really a product, maybe that helps to consider what value in use is and what it isn't. Another notion around knowledge work is it's very difficult to believe that a knowledge worker would produce a perfect result. And what I mean by that is knowledge work by its nature is going to be incomplete because our knowledge is incomplete. And most likely a knowledge work result is incorrect in one or more details, factual details, if you will, just because that's the nature of human production of things. And we got to be careful here because when we say necessarily incomplete, that means that it's just a function of us not knowing all knowledge. And you could produce a complete explanation of human knowledge to date and still not be able to answer questions. So necessarily incomplete is in that vein. And then incorrect in one or more details. A misspelling, for example. There was one word that was used about 25 times in my dissertation and got misspelled once. So the dissertation was imperfect. Now we'll move back to the quality per type of knowledge work. We've said some general things about quality and knowledge work, and so now we'll go to a per type. So when we say factual knowledge, a high quality factual knowledge result is a result that is correct in the sense of it's a true fact, it's an accurate fact, and it's correct to the appropriate level of detail. And when I say to the appropriate level of detail, there's a specificity that is part of a factual knowledge result. If somebody says, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? Well, it was signed at a bunch of different times during the same day, and actually apparently signed on more than one day. In some cases, some of the signers weren't present, but then they had the opportunity to sign it later. So there's two opportunities for error here, and if somebody asks you when was the Declaration of Independence signed, you would say July 4th, 1776. But you wouldn't give the time of the signing, probably. You certainly would probably not give multiple times for signing. Oh, well, John Hancock signed it here, and Ben Calhoun, I'm making up names now, signed it at this other time, 2:23 p.m. and 48 seconds, right? So you're not going to be giving that level of detail. And so to some degree, your answer is possibly varying in accuracy. So it's true and accurate to the appropriate level of detail. One of the interesting things about factual knowledge is the customer struggles to have any judgment of the quality of factual knowledge. A piece of factual knowledge that you don't know, if you ask the question, is typically taken more or less on faith. It's not proven the way algebra is proven. So we have this high quality equals correct. Process knowledge, the second type of category of knowledge work. Process knowledge, high quality result is doability of the process, ease of use of the process, are all the unnecessary steps eliminated. There's also a notion of regulatory compliance. Is this process going to produce a result that will pass everyone's standards of information? Generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, is one of these ideas. So doability, ease of use. Again, in this case, whether the customer likes it or not, whether the customer wants to do it or not, is really not an issue in quality. It's, if you want to dunk a basketball and you're this tall, then you got to be able to jump that high. Well, that just is. And I don't have to like that answer. I don't have to agree that that's the correct answer in order for it to be the correct answer. So again, trying to think about who is capable of judging this quality. If we take understanding knowledge, then high quality is really a sales job. Is it a reasonable result? Do you have the right experience? Can you demonstrate the right experience? Can you be convincing? Is there a case study? These kinds of things with understanding knowledge. So now we are into some understanding of whether or not the user believes in it, likes it, needs it, wants it, that determine whether the result is going to be used, and thus value in use comes into question. The fourth category, if we look at knowledge creation, high quality knowledge creation is really, really a difficult standard. All of science and all of academia is oriented around the production of new knowledge that's of high quality. And there are all kinds of different thoughts about how this works. A layperson looking at academia says, well, a set of reviewers reviews an academic paper. If it gets published, then it's assumed to be of high quality, true, correct, whatever. And that's not really what happens at all. The creation of new knowledge and the judging of the quality of the new knowledge created is what the entire enterprise of science is really about. We get into the +1 category of knowledge work, which is problem solving, and we see that a high quality outcome is an outcome that produces results, particularly with respect to the cost of implementing the solution. If you have a problem, a good solution may be much, much less than perfect. For example, if you're in a car and you have a flat tire and you go get the spare out and it's one of these donut spares, okay, that's a much, much less than perfect tire. But you put it on the car anyway because of its other properties. So problem solving quality is really weird. Often in problem solving, we actually tear things up in order to remove a problem. We actually break other things. The notion of production quality and problem solving is really absent, depending on the severity of the problem. It doesn't matter if you've got a broken leg. It doesn't matter what color the painkillers are and whether or not they taste good. You're going to eat them anyway. So this notion of results versus cost is how we deal with quality in the problem-solving area of knowledge work. In all of these areas, perhaps with problem solving, the only possible exception, production quality has a lower bound. In other words, production quality has to be of a certain level in order for the result to be useful. And that level is the solution or the knowledge or the information has to be comprehensible by the user. And that does introduce a little bit of variation because different users can comprehend different levels of information. But production quality has this lower bound. I've talked in other places about reviewing academic papers when I was in Ph.D. school. And from time to time, I had to tell my colleagues that the writing of the paper was of such poor quality, for lack of a better word, that I couldn't even understand the point that they were driving at, much less, a comment on the validity of the point they were trying to make. So there has to be a level of production quality that produces comprehensibility, but improving production quality beyond that, in many cases, I would submit is a waste. It's the overproduction of quality. So now that we've defined quality, let's start thinking about how we define good work. And I want to make a distinction here. Work produces a result. Knowledge work produces a result. That result has a level of quality, whether we can measure it or not. It has a level of quality about it. The question that we want to answer is, what does that have to say about the quality of our knowledge work? A lot of people would say your work is good work to the degree that your result is a good result. In other words, if you produce 90% quality on your result, then your work is 90% good. I'll argue that from a particular perspective. And the point that I'm trying to make is, if the quality of the work is directly proportional to the measurement of quality of the outcome, that's when we start chasing perfectionism. We say anything less than perfect result is less than perfect work. Bad result equal bad work. And that's a notion that pushes us into fear-based overproduction of quality. And fear-based overproduction of quality is my definition of perfectionism. The question then becomes, is it true that the quality of the work is directly proportional to the quality of the result of the work? So we're going to go back to a different kind of thinking here. I'll introduce what that is. So all of our work produced has flaws. Then is our work bad work? If so, to what degree is it bad? So we'll move from knowledge work generally to the specific field of decision making. And there's a really interesting book that I've mentioned several times in different podcasts and different blog posts. The book is called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. Ms. Duke is a professional poker player who also was within a month or two of completing her dissertation and acquiring a Ph.D. in psychology when she fell ill, and the illness apparently rendered her unable to complete her dissertation, so we do not call her doctor. But she did a ton of the work related to a Ph.D. in psychology, which is interesting to us because the book Thinking in Bets is an analysis of decision making as illustrated by playing poker. Duke argues that poker playing is all about decision making in terms of when to bet, how much to bet, when to fold, when to get into a game, when to get out of a game, when to play a hand, when to not play a hand, all these different decisions. And she believes that the entirety, really, of poker playing is this decision-making skill. So she's very interested in decision-making, which is arguably a category of knowledge work. It's at least an underlying skill of knowledge work, decision-making being, do I add another paragraph to this paper or do I stand pat with what I've got in place, so to speak? So in her writing, Ms. Duke illustrates an idea that she refers to as resulting. And resulting is the following series of actions. We're playing a game and we make a decision, and then we lose the hand. So we're playing a hand of poker, we're in, it's our turn, call or fold. We call, and then we wind up losing the hand. So her question is, does losing the hand make that decision a bad decision? In other words, oh, I should not have called that bet because I then lost that money. Therefore, my decision making is poor. And that's really an interesting outcome, an interesting analysis, because in a game like poker, you can make the right decision but still lose. And the reason that you can make the right decision but still lose is that there is hidden information. You don't know what your opponent has in their hand. That's hidden information. And there's also risk, luck, chance involved. So not only do you not know what's in your opponent's hand, you also don't know the next card that's going to be dealt. And so you make a probabilistic decision to bet or not to bet, and then outcome is determined by the resolution of chance in the game. She argues, since that's true, that you can make good decisions and have bad outcomes. Thus, it's a failure of logic to say, I lost the hand, so betting was a bad decision. And that's what she means by the term resulting. We take the result of the decision and bring it back into the decision. And we say, well, if the decision produced a result I don't like, then the decision must be bad. And she says that's certainly not true in poker. And she says it's not true in poker because of hidden information and because of chance. And then she says, in the world, decision making in the world, is there hidden information and is there chance? The answer to both those questions is yes. Therefore, in the world, resulting is also not a logical way to proceed, but we do it. We make a decision, and if the outcome is poor, then we almost automatically, it's almost axiomatic that we say, ooh, that was a bad decision. Well, the whole point of Ms. Duke's treatment of resulting in her book is to cast that logic in question. So we're redefining what a good decision is. The key finding, I think, of resulting is that since resulting is a problem and it's illogical, that finding shows that our outcomes are divorced from the quality of our effort to at least some degree. If you make an irrational betting decision in poker and lose, then yes, at some level you can say, well, that's because the decision was bad. But there's some area in which the decision quality and chance and hidden information balance each other off, where it's worth the risk to make the decision. But there's not this tight correlation between the decision and the result. There's not this tight correlation between our work, decision-making work, and our result, winning the hand. And so if decision-making is a kind of knowledge work, then does resulting apply out to the rest of knowledge work? And that's what we'll be thinking about. Resulting is bad because it causes us to doubt. It causes us to unnecessarily change good processes for bad ones. If we make a good decision and luck turns against us, or there's some hidden information that would have changed our decision, then we get a bad outcome and we automatically change our rule. It could have been a good rule. So our method of improving our rule thus is no longer logical. So walking that all the way back to knowledge work results. And the question is, if our only measure is quality of result, then how do we know whether or not we did good work? Is there some way that we can know we did good work? Just like, is there some way we can know we made a good decision even though we lost the hand? Well, elsewhere, a book called Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath, they talk about decision-making quality is a result of the decision-making process and following the decision-making process. And this makes perfect sense to me. If we can't define the quality of a decision based on whether or not we like the outcome or the result of that work, then we need to create a process for two reasons. One is so that following the process becomes our definition of doing good work, and we can hold people to that standard as they engage in tasks for us. We can say, follow the process, and the outcome doesn't matter. Follow the process. And a famous football coach has been teaching his players this up until his retirement approximately 2 months ago as of this recording. So if we engage in resulting, it causes us to change good processes for bad ones, I would argue, over time. When we look at athletics, there's an interesting feature, which is there's apparently some chance involved in, for example, shooting a basketball. So the players practice their shooting motion. Defense has something to say about this. They practice their shooting motion, and sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't. Free throws, for example. You could argue that there's no reason for any professional basketball player to ever miss a free throw, but they do. And it is generally considered to be some external factor that we don't really understand because their form is analyzed and taught to them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we can have a good shot and still not score. And so that's this resulting problem that we face. I would say it's obvious by inspection that the result of knowledge work has hidden information, and that hidden information is we never know 100% of what the customer's need is. That's hidden information. Whether the customer knows it or not is immaterial to the question of hidden information. We can't get the information, so it's hidden from us as we produce. And two, the notion of risk. Our results have some risk in them. Our work, for example, based on experience. Well, perhaps the experience applied in some different scenario and we weren't aware of how the difference worked out. So there's some risk. It's never rolling dice per se, but I would argue that there's some risk involved, some chance involved. Therefore, if a good decision is one that's based on a good decision-making process and following that process, then I would argue that other knowledge work is good work is defined by following the production process. And by that, I don't mean a factory process, but I do mean a decision-making process about how the work is going to be done and what's going to be created. Resulting is a problem for knowledge workers. We've already alluded to this. The perfection trap is a result of resulting. And perfectionism is wasteful, as we've talked about. I would say if we can't determine a work standard, we default to production quality. And if it's true that beyond a certain level, increasing production quality is wasteful, then defaulting to high production quality is probably wasteful in many cases. If we engage in resulting in our work product, our work quality relative to our work process, it can make our delivery process weak. It can make our work process weak, the same way it could make a decision-making process weak. And finally, resulting saps our confidence. If we're constantly evaluating whether our work process is good work based on what our result looks like, then we're going to not feel confident in our work processes, which is the only thing we can really have confidence in. So if we can't engage in this resulting, then what do we do as knowledge workers about quality? One thing I would argue is that as knowledge workers, we need to get much more comfortable with the idea of best effort. I'm hired for my expertise. My expertise will produce the best effort. And that's the goal. That's the amount of quality that needs to be delivered here, is a best effort kind of quality. I think in most legal senses, consulting is considered to be a best effort kind of exercise by default. But I think we need to embrace that, because that allows us to say, I'm going to give my best effort given the constraints. One of the constraints is my experience. Another constraint is the amount of time I have available to produce a result. What to do about quality? We don't need to be impervious to feedback from qualified observers of our work product. We need to develop a process to measure over time, to measure the quality of our outputs in some general way, and to work on our process, to change our process such that our quality goes up, if for no other reason than we know how to do that when we need to. I would argue that we don't always need to produce at our highest quality standard, but that we do need to know how to adjust that quality standard based on the needs of the user of our product. I will say what to do about quality. I think that Scrum or Agile project management can help, because one of the underlying notions of Agile project management is that you continue to improve until the user says stop. And the user is the one that understands the cost benefit trade-off best. The user is the satisficer and says, yes, well, we've spent X amount of dollars and we've achieved X amount of result, and that's going to have to be good enough for us right now. We don't have budget, or we don't have time to continue to chase a better and better and better result. So we're good. Thank you very much. And Scrum and Agile project management really puts us in a position where we can do exactly that. We can continue to bake the cake until it's done, whatever done means in the eye of the beholder. The challenge of Agile project management is that the user has to be highly involved. The user has to be committed to participating in the development of the solution in ways that are atypical in a product-based world. The user is much more involved in the production of the outcome than is typical in non-Agile project management. So in that same vein, another thing that we can do about quality is to use lots of minimum viable products, use lots of drafts, use lots of partial productions. And those need to be complete at the appropriate level so that the user can actually try them out and say, okay, does it work? Does it not? Other things that we can do about this situation, I would argue, is to develop our confidence in other ways. I've mentioned in a couple of different podcasts the book, The Confident Mind by Nate Zinsser. And I think that's important for us here, is to have confidence about our work such that we can say, my work was good, and then deliver the outcome of our work and not have our confidence shaken by the precise level of quality we were able to produce. As they say in basketball, good shooters have a short memory. And if you believe in streaks, then it's very hard to be a good shooter, to be a confident shooter. So all of that needs to work back into our work as knowledge workers. We need to begin to believe that following our process is good work. I would say at a minimum that focused work, highly focused work for our target amount of time, the amount of time that we've dedicated to this project, should be considered good work. If we're able to focus, and we're able to focus for the period of time we expected to be able to focus, I would say that as knowledge workers, we're doing good work. And we can then be confident that our result is in fact our best effort. And back to that best effort kind of thinking. We need to remember that an experiment is good. The definition of a good experiment is that the experiment produces usable data. It is not true that in order to be good, an experiment has to support a specific hypothesis. It just means that it has to produce good data, reliable data, good measured data, accurate data. So when we're out there in the world doing these MVPs, these minimum viable products, do good experiments. Make product that allows people to really evaluate it and that allows time for them to come back and tell you, oh, since you gave me this, I better understand what I actually wanted. Can you add X to it? And do good experiments and good work in those ways and apply all that to these minimum viable products. Well, where have we gotten here? We've talked about the notion of resulting in decision making, and we've talked about how resulting might interfere with our ability to produce knowledge work. And we looked at quality in each of the 4+1 categories of knowledge work and determined that, yes, resulting can hurt our ability to be confident about the knowledge work that we're doing. It can also lead to perfectionism, which is waste. And so as we're thinking about our knowledge work processes, we need to define what our work process is. And then we can begin to think of good work, of doing our work well, of being good knowledge workers as our adherence to that defined work process. Over time, we look at our results and we look at the market and we go back and look at some of our decisions and the quality of those decisions. And then we assess our process. And perhaps in the long term, our process needs change, needs revision, needs some new feature that we can add in order to improve the general quality of our output and thus improve our own knowledge work results in the bigger picture and over time. Well, I hope this has been helpful for you. Certainly clarifying these ideas to the degree that I could talk about them has helped me understand them. I think that one of the ways to improve knowledge worker productivity is to understand more and more about what knowledge work is and about the properties of knowledge work and about how knowledge work results are produced. So as we understand this more, then we should have better opportunities to influence productivity in the knowledge workspace. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the Attention Compass process. Attention Compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusyright.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do Busy Right.